It's a bit disconcerting to hear you all boil down Bernie's lack of support from people of color as when, as quote, when they hear his message, they'll like him. It's condescending to assume we haven't educated ourselves about his stances and records and still aren't impressed. His vocal, rabid supporters online are not helping him, and they are only turning people of color off. Marching with MLK means nothing to people today. We want to know what Bernie Sanders will do today. For someone who is, quote, on our side, he needs an awful lot of, quote, encouragement to speak on anything concerning people of color. And he's always immediately pivots back to the economy. Income inequality and access to well-paying jobs means nothing when our lives can be snuffed out by trigger-happy cops. Bernie Sanders needs to get on this seriously or he will lose. There's a couple of different ways I want to respond to that. First of all, we certainly don't mean it in a condescending way. I think the reality is that most voters across all demographics are not heavily engaged yet in the election. And Hillary Clinton has great brand recognition across all demographics, and I think some political loyalty from certain people and communities of color. And I do think that part of Bernie's problem has been name recognition, has been getting his name out. And I do think for some people, yes, as they have heard his message, it has resonated and has clicked. And that has been sort of publicly demonstrated with people like, even Killer Mike as an example. But your other points, I want to take them one by one. I mean, first of all, there's no doubt that Bernie Sanders is very tightly focused on the economy and income inequality. And I think his views can get limited and reductionist from that standpoint. There are other and distinct issues as affects people of color. Now, I think with regards to things like police brutality and criminal justice reform, I actually think he's pivoted very strongly on that. I think when he said that automatically any police killing should, trigger a Department of Justice investigation automatically, to me, that's significant policy. And look, the reality is that will racial issues in any way be taken care of by robustly dealing with inequality and single-payer healthcare? Of course not. And we need look no further than accomplishments in Europe to see that. But would an agenda that seriously took on structural poverty, that seriously took on income inequality, have serious racial implications? Absolutely. So he is right in that regard. And then the third aspect of this conversation, which I have to admit really confuses me, is I think, if Hillary Clinton was this great intersectional candidate who had an amazing policy on overcoming America's poisonous racial legacy and structural racism today, and there was a conflict there between her and Bernie Sanders, I would get it. But I don't see it. I mean, I see the Clintons both, frankly, as people who, look, I like them probably more than many members of this audience, but let's be real here. I mean, Bill Clinton executed a mentally handicapped black man when he was running for president in a Democratic primary to prove his anti-crime bona fides. These people supported welfare reform, which had a disproportionate effect on the African-American community. Hillary Clinton voted for additional and tougher versions of it as well when she was in the Senate. Their stances on crime, on sentencing, on the drug war are well to the right and, again, had vastly disproportionate impacts on the African-American community. I think supporting the death penalty versus not supporting the death penalty, those are significant differences. So I think it's fine. And I thought what Ta-Nehisi wrote about Bernie and reparations is absolutely right. And I agree that if the aspect of Bernie Sanders' campaign is enlarging the American political imagination, it has to include getting really serious about the fact that this is a white supremacist country. But when we get to the electoral distinctions, the compare and contrast to me is baffling when it comes to an actual policy point of view. So I see this odd argument taking place amongst some Hillary supporters where they're taking an end run to the significant left around Bernie to circle to support a center-right candidate, which is confusing to me. And look, again, I'll say it again. I don't dislike Hillary Clinton. I think she's fine. I don't have a big problem voting for her. But I think if you listen to people in this audience and you recognize amongst a lot of people, not just Democrats, that, the barrier for Hillary Clinton is pretty high. for a fair amount of people. And there is this history of maneuvering amongst a variety of different positions. And there is a coziness with Wall Street. And there has been a failure so far to really articulate why she needs to be president, frankly. Going out and sort of disingenuously demonizing Bernie and, whacking him to the left on something like reparations. I mean, Hillary Clinton did not support the Conyers bill on reparations. Hillary Clinton has not come out and said this should be something. And I agree, Bernie Sanders is a sort of moral movement candidate, so you can hold him to a bit of a higher standard. But I am genuinely perplexed on the electoral confidence of Hillary Clinton over Bernie Sanders on these issues. But I think, I think you're right to critique him on sort of bringing everything back to the economy too much. I think you're right. I think he needs to broaden his tracks. I think he needs to broaden his tracks on foreign policy, frankly. I don't mean it in a condescending way when I say more people exposed to his message, he'll do better. I think that that's just a reality of being a lesser known candidate. And I think that same thing would apply, frankly, for any demographic. And it has shown to apply to any demographic. He is the only candidate, Democrat or Republican, that overall, the more people get to know, the more they like. And then, the third aspect is I'm confused as to how those critiques circle into a support for Hillary if you're just going on a policy by policy basis.